And my microphone's turned on. And this study session for the Board of Trustees of the Town of Estes Park on April 8th, 2025. The session is now in session. Okay, we have, I believe, Town Clerk Jackie Williamson is going to entertain us on 3 subjects, starting with the annual review of the vacation home cap.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to preface this discussion from the very beginning that all 3 of these topics, the vacation home cap, which is required to be reviewed, as you all know, by a municipal code annually in and around April, so here we are. The wait list discussion and the hosted short-term rental discussion are all really interplay, and maybe we won't have a presentation. Kind of all interplay with each other. And so I know that some of the comments you might have, you might need to want to wait to have the comments later or whatnot. I'm going to stop at after each section and give you a chance to ask questions and whatnot, and provide comment to staff. But if a comment or a question comes later in the presentation during a different section, please don't hesitate. I just know that there's a lot of interplay with all of these, and they all impact each other. So I just wanted to kind of make that comment right out of the gate. So please feel free to interrupt me as we go through. So we are here today to talk about short-term rentals and the kind of the annual renewal report that we have. Real briefly, I also want to touch base, just because I get this opportunity once a year, to just let you know where we landed with our business license renewal process as well. So I just have a slide on that. So again, to get us started, we're here to review the annual renewal process. We're also here to review that annual cap, as we discussed, as required by the municipal code, and then to discuss any future changes or issues you all would like staff to consider or address. And then kind of the new one for this year is the wait list, because we are nearing the end of our wait list, so we need to discuss with you all next steps and where we want to go with the future with that wait list. So first and foremost, if you just give me a moment, I'd like to go over our business license. This is that one slide. It kind of gives you an idea of where we are with our business licensing overall. So again, that's our general licenses, our home-based businesses, contract licenses, and such. So we have currently licensed this year 1,462 licenses. During our renewal process, we had 39 of those licenses that were delinquent, meaning they did not pay their business license by the mandatory date of January 31st. Remember, in our code, if a business does not pay their license by January 31st, there's an automatic $200 penalty fee that's assessed to that business license. We initiated contact with those licenses in town that did not pay by that deadline, gave them until February 15th to come into compliance, which meant, again, paying that business license fee plus that annual.
Was that a grace period without penalty?
No.
Okay.
Nope, it's a hard and fast January 31st. Okay. We sent out renewal notices starting December 1st.
It scares me every year, right?
Yeah.
I think it works.
And once the February 15th date came and went, we then turned them over to our code enforcement officer, who then attempted to bring people into compliance. She did write 4 citations. 2 were cured before court, and then we have 2 coming to court in May. So that's kind of where we are today with business licensing. So to get moving forward on our vacation home process, this is a snapshot over time of where we are with our vacation home licenses. Again, our current cap for residentially zoned vacation homes is 322. As you can see throughout the years, as we met that cap and it continued to be in place at 322, our commercial properties have continued to go up. So as of this year, we are at 237 commercially zoned properties. You'll see that right now it says 314, which is under our cap. That's because we are in the process of taking 8 off of the wait list and having them go through that process of getting registered and getting licenses. We like to just follow up with you annually on the transferability piece, just to show you where we are to date. So as of the end of 2024, we had 23 properties that were not transferable, so they're licensed. And if they were to sell, they would not be able to transfer that license. So that number continues to grow as you placed that transferability limitation back in 2021. You know, with the 8 that we are currently in the process of licensing, we're going to be in the 30s at some point this year.
Jackie, because that wasn't this board and it wasn't, I mean, I don't remember the details. So when you say a property sells and it's not transferable, there's no choice.
Correct.
Okay.
That license goes back into the pool and somebody comes off the wait list.
What drove that decision?
It was a policy decision by the board to remove that transferability option.
What precipitated that change? I understand the board made the decision. Anybody remember? Okay.
So I can just say from my point of view and what we talked about, I think a lot of people looked at when we put the cap on, did not realize what it would do to real estate prices of those properties. And the fact that one person could get a license and just sell it and sell it and sell it and sell it. And number one, not open up for other people, because why would you? Your property's worth, you know, $100,000 more with that certificate than it is without. At first they were like, oh, it's worth 20, but we come to find out that it was worth more and more. So your house next to you was worth $100,000 more because it had a certificate, but you couldn't get one because they're never going to let it go. You know? And so it was more of a, instead of making certain houses worth more because of that, the ones that were grandfathered were ones before we made the rule, because we didn't think it was fair. Well, the board did not think it was fair to say, okay, you bought this thinking you would have it forever, and you can't. So it was after that date. Yep. So it was basically so that, number one, we could open it up for other people without having to increase the cap like crazy, and that the properties wouldn't just be going up in price unfairly for the people who didn't have a vacation license. That was my thought during it, and I think that was kind of the board's thought.
Jackie, I got a question. Do we have anything in the regulations to protect against abuse in the situation where property is owned by like a limited liability company, and rather than transferring the property and the license, they transfer an interest in the limited liability company instead? You're the one I
I was going to defer to him, but he's just going to take the mic.
I'm so glad you asked that question. That is an important thing we need to address, and I would love to come with Jackie and bring something on that
I
topic
think that's
before
important.
too long.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Thank you, Attorney Kramer. So another key element that you all wanted us to kind of keep an eye on is the number of lapsed vacation home licenses and the reasons behind it. This was really started to become a key element of this report with the workforce housing regulatory linkage fee, because there was an assumption that a number of people would drop their licenses for that. I will say we've had some, but that's not typically the primary reason that we see that a license is lapsed. It can be lapsed for a number of reasons, as we outline here. This year, I would say this year and last year was due to expired licenses, meaning they did not renew in time. Again, that's a hard and fast January 31st date. There is no wiggle room with that date. Overdue transfers is another one. We find out that the property transferred and they didn't put it in their name within the 30-day requirement in the code. And incomplete applications seem to be one that we saw a lot of last year, and we started to see more of this year again. Again, you can see with those numbers from 2025, we've had 13 so far this year. 1 was an incomplete application, 8 were residentially zoned and were for those number of reasons I mentioned, as well as 5 commercial. Those 5 commercial, just as a reminder, there is no limitation. They can come back and reapply, but all fees apply to that if they were to reapply. So the residential vacation home cap, again, as we kind of stated at the beginning, we took 8 off the wait list. So we started the year with 16 on the wait list. We've taken 8 off and we're processing those 8 right now. And that leaves 8 on the wait list. We've been averaging throughout the years, roughly, as you can kind of see there, around 8 or so throughout the years, more in certain years, but on average about 8. The next application to come off of that wait list was received in August of 2021. So in 2024, we saw a large number of applications come off the wait list, and a lot of them didn't complete the application process or were just no longer interested because so much time had gone by. I mean, we're looking at almost 4 years now from the next application to come off the wait list since they applied. People's lives change, circumstances change, what they decide to do with the property changes, or they just sell the property and they're no longer interested. So there's a number of reasons why we're seeing that. But that is a significant issue for us, and another reason why we're here today to talk about the wait list. So I think that's the last slide related to the cap. Is there any other information I can provide you before we move on to the wait list? Or any comments you all want to make about the cap at this point? Okay. So the wait list. This is just a bit of a history because some of you have been on the board this whole entire time, but some of you are kind of new to it. So the residential vacation home cap was part of the ordinance that was passed in December of 2016. It was Ordinance 2916, which set all the regulations for our vacation homes at that time, including the cap. So the initial cap was met on May of 2018, and we began the wait list for our vacation home, residentially zoned vacation homes. By October of 2021, so about 3.5 years later, we were reaching the list of 60 applicants, receiving applications or inquiries daily, and we were starting to worry that we were going to end up with a large wait list with really no way of working through it, knowing that we were taking off roughly 8 a year. That to us was at least a 5 to 7 year wait list. We were taking a lot of phone calls annually. Where am I on the wait list? When can I expect to come off? And it kind of became a daily grind of phone calls related to it. So we came to the board thinking that this would be the best option of placing a moratorium, which Ordinance 1621 did place a moratorium on that wait list. And we no longer took applications, new applications for residentially zoned properties. And we've been working through that wait list ever since. So at the beginning, go ahead.
Sorry, I
No,
don't
go
want to
ahead.
interrupt you. So just to confirm, the highest it got was 60.
Before we
and then-
placed the cap
And then
on
we
it.
capped it. We've just been working down from that 60 number.
Yep,
Thanks.
since October of 2021. So at the beginning of 2024, our wait list was at 36. Again, we were averaging about 8. We still thought we had a few years left of that wait list. By the end of 2024, we saw our wait list stand at 16. Again, that was largely due to taking people off of that wait list, them saying they're not interested anymore, I've sold the property, not completing the application process. We had quite a few of those happen. And so we did work through quite a few number of those applications last year. Again, as I stated, we've taken 8 off of that list and we've got 8 left. This is just more of a pictorial of that because some people like to see timelines. So we thought we'd provide it in a little bit of a different viewpoint for you. Any questions before I move into options? Okay. So staff has identified 3 options to bring forward to you all for consideration, your comments and questions on it. Those 3 options are a no action option, an annual lottery, or a wait list with a cap. So a no action option would just be allow the wait list to be exhausted. take no more residential licenses, don't issue anymore, don't take any more applications, and just reduce that number through attrition if that's something the board would be interested in. And really just focus those vacation homes in that commercial zoning districts. So that is an option. Another option is that annual lottery. So we would administer a lottery annually. We would recommend an application and a very small application fee to get on that lottery, into that lottery. What we do believe is that it would help reduce our administrative costs overall throughout the year because we'd be administering this once a year. After the renewal process, all those people who decided to put their application and fee into the pool, we would then do a lottery and pull from that lottery and fill those vacant spots that we would have on our residential, within our residential cap. It would provide an annual, go ahead.
So that would be just for the ones below the cap that are open.
Correct. So like today we are at 314. We would go through and we would pull, do an annual lottery to fill up to 322.
Okay.
It would provide an annual opportunity for people to get a license. It would limit the stacking by one particular property owner. So for example, we had somebody who owns a complex of, I think it's 8 or 10 units. They came in before the cap was put on the current wait list, the moratorium was put on the current wait list, and they brought an application in for each one of their properties. So they stacked the list. They had unit A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so forth. So it would limit that. They could put an application in for each, but they would have the same odds of being chosen on that lottery as anybody else. Some of the disadvantages would be there would be no guarantee that you would get a license that year. And we do see some challenges, determining eligibility, how many applications can somebody submit, and what not. It is a very common method that's used by other municipalities for other licensing types, especially we see it a lot with marijuana licensing. So it's not an unknown way to do business licensing or whatnot. So the third option that we wanted to present to you is a wait list with a cap. So we would suggest not having a free-for-all wait list again because we fear we would end up with the same situation we had before. So if this is something that the board wanted to look at, we would suggest some sort of a cap. Something probably a 2 to 3 year waiting period seems to be a viable option. Once you get past that, people start making other decisions about their property. It just becomes too long for them to wait. Again, we saw about 8 before the 3.5 year mark. We saw about 8 coming off annually. So that would be anywhere from 16, probably 20 or to 20 to 25. We would put a limit on. It would be a suggestion by the staff. It would provide the owner with some certainty. They're on a list, they know where they are on that list, and they can kind of anticipate when they might come off that list. However, we do see some issues with that stacking. One owner of a multi-unit complex might come in and try to apply for all of their units and take all 20 or 25 spots, let's say.
But they're buying property, they own property.
Sure.
What's the con of that? I understand if it's one owner that has those units.
It's just limiting other people's options.
Totally understand that.
That's all.
But if that's when they build them, I don't know if it feels unfair, but what if they were all brothers who brought different properties?
Sure.
What if there's a lot of ways.
Sure.
Okay.
It's just
Didn't know
an
if there was something
observation
I
by
was missing.
staff.
Okay.
And it could create that last piece there, it could create that rush to get in, who's gonna get in first. We probably would want to have some kind of a review criteria. If your application's not complete, it gets pushed back and we go on to the next one, sort of scenario, would be something that staff would probably suggest.
How many times has that happened, the stacking, that you know of as of yet?
I can only speak to that one instance that we saw towards the end when people knew that suspected that we were bringing forward this moratorium. And I think just knowing that we get on average Some days are more than others. Bunny can contest. Another reason she's here in case we need her. She's my phone a friend. But we get on average, since the beginning of the year, we've probably seen 20 to 30 phone calls on when can I get on the wait list. I think she said we had like 5 phone calls the other day. So we just are seeing a lot of interest. So once this wait list opens, we imagine there would be a rush.
I added up those numbers and it looks like a little over 11 per year on average, between 11 and 12, just FYI.
So I don't want to get too far into the weeds because this would be up to staff, in terms of operations, but I do want to understand the impact on what we might look like, what we think this might look like on staff time if we went with the wait list with the cap and that rush in particular. Have you thought about how, if the board gave that direction, have you thought about how, is it at this day, starting at this time, and it's the order in which it receives, and we work our way through, and the timing of when you'd be able, because each of those applications, I imagine, are fairly involved to process. So I'm just curious about that, what we might imagine. Before we give direction, I kind of want to know what the impact is
Sure.
on staff and process.
I'm going to go ahead and, since Attorney Kramer turned his
Sure.
light on, see what comment he has on that,
Sure.
and then I'll jump in
Thanks, Town Clerk
afterwards.
Williamson. So for both the second option and the third option, there are technical challenges. And if we get into discussing any of them in particular, we probably will need to get into some of those weeds. On the third option, it's not just an administrative burden, it's kind of a logistical challenge.
Right.
Because if you telegraph that the wait list is going to open up and it's first come, first served, then are we going to have a line at the door? Are people going to be queuing up at 3 a.m. to try to get in and get on the wait list? Or how do you do that? It's almost like you need a lottery to get on the wait list, but that's just wild. So we'd have to figure out how you do that. Otherwise, you open up the wait list at a time that you don't telegraph beforehand, and it's just a matter of who hears about it first. That doesn't feel very fair either. So it's not clear to me what we would do to solve that problem, and to me, that's the biggest issue with option 3.
Okay.
So I think it would be a good idea to present this to the local realtors to see what their perception is on how the approach would affect the market. Because I would tend to think that the realtors are likely to like option 3 because of at least the certainty they can give to their customers that would be lacking in option 2. But I'm not sure. I just think that we should consider more than just the administrative aspects of this. Let's figure out if we think our choice will have an impact on real estate values or real estate transfers in any way, shape, or form. So just a suggestion.
Sure, and I guess I would just mention, it's been 3.5 years that they've been operating basically without a wait list. And so I'm sure they've found ways to administer how they're selling and advertising these sort of properties. Not to say we shouldn't have that conversation. I just wanted to point that out, that we've been dealing with realtors for 3.5 years about this wait list and the fact that it's had a moratorium and they haven't had options. And really, I think what they've done is, as if I can go back really, well, I guess go back a lot. Hope I don't make anybody sick. Again, you can see that commercial number just keeps going up. I think they're really trying to push their clients towards those commercial properties. They know they can operate today and they don't have to worry about trying to get a residential license. That's, just me looking at the numbers, but that's what those numbers kind of tell me.
Well, I think that's kind of what we wanted, was these commercial operations to be in commercial areas, so it's working. Is there a cost to stay on the wait list, or you just get on it and you're,
There is no cost currently.
okay, so there's not an annual, does anybody get on it and then just kind of, yeah, just hang out there and take a spot, and then when it comes up, say, not interested?
Well, we've had a moratorium on it, so we haven't had any applications for 3.5 years. And like I said, this last year, we really saw the impact of being on that list for 3 years, almost 4 now, where people are like, yeah, I changed my mind, or I'm doing long-term rentals, or I've sold the property. We've heard a lot of different explanations for why they didn't want to move forward.
But we don't know if they want to move, we don't check with them, say, do you want to stay on the list every year?
We don't.
Once they're
What
on it,
we-
they're there. Yeah.
What we do is staff has been sending out annually the list so that they can see what position they're on annually. And we tell the next 15, or at least we have been in the past, or under 15 now. But we've been telling like the next 15, you might want to consider getting ready. Like you can go ahead and get your life safety inspection done if you need one, those sort of things. Get your property ready because we anticipate you coming off in the next year or two. That's what we have been doing annually since the moratorium.
And I can just contest to that. Personally, we had a home that we actually bought for workforce housing, and in the changes in our business, we went on the list years ago to think, if we don't use it for workforce, we would do a long-term rental. And this last time it came up, and it's just like, no, we have workforce. We have people in there that's not working for us, but they're working in town, and that's what we want to keep it at. But the letters did come to us in preparation, so you would have enough time and keep you abreast as to the progress of that list, and it worked fine. My point on that I was going to make, I kind of, and I'm wondering if others have thought of this as well. I don't want to give direction at this time. And if my direction, it would be no action. And that is because I think it really is going to tie into the hosted short-term rentals, in my opinion, because we are going to be discussing the opportunity, for them to, what do we do with those that don't fit in XYZ? Are they going to be going on the list? What we are going to do? And I personally don't want to see the list get any larger. I think, our problems we've had with noise complaint and things like that have all come in that residential area of rentals. So I want to just mention that to the other trustees that, we have another piece that could affect that list coming up. And I want to just bring that to everybody's attention, that we may want to consider what that's going to look like as well.
That's a good point from Trustee Youngland. However, I favor option 2. I do think when we get to the hosted short-term rentals, we need to consider that, and we need to consider how it balances with an annual lottery and what number we would put in there for a lottery cap, but that's my preference.
Another question about logistics. The lottery can, so your thought would be, so anybody can submit, so that let's say if there's an annual lottery, anyone can submit. They have to qualify, of course, all of that. And then you would draw whatever number is available up to whatever, if we kept it 322. And then if somebody didn't get drawn, they just get entered in the same, they have the same chance in the next year of being drawn from that pool. Or do they get like an additional because they've been in it an extra year?
Yes, this has been called the Hunger Games approach.
Right. They use it for ultra runs, like the Hard Rock run.
I know.
It's the same. You get credits year after
I
year.
think that Town Administrator Mahalik was the one who brought that option to my mind, and I thought of Hunger Games immediately. It hasn't been discussed at that level, but that is definitely a policy decision that the board could recommend if that's something that we wanted to do, and maybe they get, entered for a couple of years, or I don't know. I mean, they let us know they still want to be in the pool for next year. I'm not sure what those mechanics would look like right now. I haven't gone that far down the path, but it's certainly a policy decision. If the board would like to consider that and adding that to option 2, we could definitely do that and look at that.
I am trying to stay out of the weeds, but it's just thinking about how it actually gets out. And then my other question is, and I apologize if you mentioned this, I didn't see it in the presentation, and I was trying to go back through my notes and things, but why, can you tell me how or why we landed on the 322?
Sure. I
Specifically?
can't tell you specifically the 580, the math behind it, but at the time in 2016, when we were looking at this, it was estimated, I think there was a consultant, Frank might remember as well back then, that said, we believe you have roughly 508, or we think you have, I think it was like 1,000 vacation homes that, and 588 roughly was the number they thought were residentially zoned vacation homes. So that set the cap in 2016, because remember, at that point in time, we were also doing the licensing for the properties in the county, so the unincorporated area. So then when that land use, that joint land use dissolved in 2020, we took a look at what we had licensed in April of 2020 and said 322 happened to be licensed inside town limits and 266 were licensed in the county. And that's where we set our new cap at.
That is ringing a lot of bells. Thank you.
Yep.
And so at that time, that was 2020. So we kept it at, and then we've seen it, the commercial go up about 100.
I can bring that
since
back up
then.
if
I'm
that
looking at it
helps.
on my computer. Yeah, I think it's come up, yeah, about 100, almost exactly 100 since 2020 in the commercial. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Oops. This was just to help kind of depict the options for you. Green being kind of those more favorable for the option. Blue being more, yellow was too hard to see, so I used blue as being more of those options that I think are more of a disadvantage potentially to the applicant. So any other questions on the wait list, or we want to move to the other?
I do have a question.
Sure.
Between 2 and 3, referring back to staff time and things like that, it seemed to me that option 2 wouldn't create as much upfront issues as soon as it gets released than option 3.
Yeah,
Is that?
I mean, I think either one, there's going to be staff time involved. With option 2, it's kind of one and done annually, I think, is the point of view that staff has. Whereas 3, we would fill that cap up however long it took. I don't think it would take very long, depending on what the cap is set at, to really fill that cap. And then it's managing those licenses, those applications that are on the list. I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say some people would call us 3 and 4 times a year and we'd be like, you're still in the same place. We really don't move people except for at the beginning of the year unless a property sells. We don't really have a lot of movement towards the end of the year. So it'd be more of that management that we would have to be dealing with on the other side of the wait list.
Okay, thank you.
On
Town
option 3.
attorney.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I do think overall less staff burden option 2 than option 3. The challenge with option 2, and it's not as sticky a challenge as the one with option 3, I think, but it's figuring out with the assumption is everyone gets one entry, but one entry per what? It's a denominator question. Is it one entry per person, one entry per property? One entry per property, one entry per unit is the easiest to apply. If it's one entry per permit, then we get into the kinds of questions that Trustee Eigel and Trustee Brown earlier were alluding to, where, well, if it's one per person, what happens if you have a relative enter for you? What happens if you set up an LLC? What happens if you're a part owner of several LLCs? So we would just have to work through exactly how we wanted to design that lottery. And we'd have to be very careful about it, because one mistake in designing a lottery and you end up in a place you really don't want to be.
So what's the difference between 1 and 3? I mean, one would exhaust the wait list, but the other one still has a wait list, and I assume you'd still go in first come, first served to get a permit.
So the difference between option 1 and 3 is option 1, we would just exhaust the 8 we have on our current wait list, and we no longer have a wait list, and we
would no longer have
we
a
would
wait
no
list.
longer
Okay.
take any additional
That
residential
was the part I didn't
applications.
get.
So in essence, what would happen is your cap number would reduce over time with attrition.
Yeah, I didn't understand we wouldn't have a wait list, yeah. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I look at this, Trustee Hazelton mentioned races, same thing with river permits. And I remember the Grand Canyon, I applied for a permit there and it took me 10 years to get it. But I knew I was gonna get one eventually. Now, 10 years is a long time to plan ahead for vacation, but that was the waiting list. Then they changed it to this lottery system where you got it into, so you got a chance to get it every year, but the chances of getting one are slim to none. So it's got pros and cons both ways. Either way, it's tough to get in, so I can see the advantages to both. Yeah, I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other, but
Yeah.
that helps with knowing we would not have a wait list on the other
Right.
one.
I think option one is really if the board sees the cap as something they would want to reduce, that would be a mechanism, and it wouldn't have to be a long-standing mechanism. So for example, if the board decided they wanted to see 300 of these instead of 322 in residentially zoned districts, you would move forward with action or option one until we reached that threshold, and then maybe you would come back and consider these other options. So it's just a mechanism for the board to review and decide whether or not they would want to use that to reduce the cap in any way, if the board thought the cap was needed to be reduced.
Obviously, we or future boards can always reconsider this and change it. The lottery's not going to have the numbers like the New York City Marathon or the Grand Canyon. I mean, it'll still be, I think, a relatively small number. We're living in a finite universe. And I think that there's advantages in administrative overhead as well as fairness.
I was just gonna piggyback on that. That's why I was thinking of option one, because, you know, if we do bring those in, those hosted short-term rentals in, that puts us over the cap, and this way we can control that and then revisit that later, was my thinking.
Yeah, seeing some of the other mountain communities, number one actually is the most appealing to me, but I get the two other options. I would like to explore something with the annual lottery that almost like a river tag or deer tag or whatever, that there's some carryover, because if somebody's been waiting on a list for 9 years and every time they enter the lottery and they don't get it, that doesn't seem as fair to somebody that buys it the first year and gets the lottery. And I get it's a lottery and it's thus, you know, somebody can win the, you know, Mega Millions 3 times in a row and somebody never wins like me. But I do think there's something to that. Like you've been sitting on it and kept your applications in or kept your property up, you know, and then 3 or 4 years you have 3 chances versus 1. I don't know how that works.
Yep.
But I do think the fair list, if we do a lottery, that if the longer you're on that list, or enter the lottery, the more points you get or more chances you get or something like that, because
Sure.
I just think it's
Yeah.
a little bit more fair for people who've been waiting for a long time.
Yeah, likely what I would suggest is that we would just verify for those individuals who didn't get pulled off that list, are you still interested in being in the lottery for the next year? You know, and giving them a chance to let us know. We still own the property, we're still interested, all of those sort of check those boxes. And then exactly that, they would probably get in a, you know, for each year they remain on there, get an additional entry basically. It's kind of the simple way of thinking about it.
Don't freak out when I might suggest this, but what has it been considered about doing a combination of option 2 and 3 if this board directed that we wanted to reopen the wait list? Is there an opportunity to have a lottery window that says, okay, we're reopening the wait list, we're taking the recommendation of a reasonable cap of 2 to 3 years, so we will pull for the first 24 lottery to be on that wait list, and then once, you know, and then anything beyond that, it could be a first come, first serve, you know, progressively if we pull, you know, let's say that our wait list cap is 24, 2 come off of it, then the next 2 in line come in. Again, there's still a logistic, but thinking of it seems like the problem is like this re-entry period, and then after that, it feels more. Honestly, it feels more fair to me for what Frank had said to go with option 3, because at least you know where you're on the list and you can, it helps you make some decisions. But I also understand that the re-entry point is going to be, could be, I think I'm with Gary, I don't think it's going to be like hundreds, but it'll probably be several. Has that been discussed at all, or what do you think about that?
We haven't discussed it. I mean, I can see the option of putting out a lottery and then selecting up to that wait list cap, that whatever the board decided, if that was 20, 30, whatever that was, that would pretty much lock us in for 2 to 3 years. And I think then we would, once we got through that list, we would come back to a lottery again, as kind of how I would see potentially meshing those two together. But we really haven't talked about it, and I see the light on again, so maybe somebody that has better ideas than me.
No, I agree with all that. I think that's doable. The downside of that is just administrative burden, because you've got staff running a lottery and a wait list.
I think to address another issue that came up, I think the only clear way to do this is you're allowed one application per property or per unit. So somebody can't, them and their spouse, their kids, their dog, all apply for the same property, particularly in the lottery. I know, because I've done that in river permits. And I still haven't gotten a permit. But they shouldn't be able to have, 10 different applications for the same property because it's owned in a family trust and every cousin and sister signed up and applied. Just say one application per property would settle that. Or per unit, at least, per unit.
I'd like I understand the challenge of reestablishing this list. I think a lottery is a good way to go with that. To establish it, whether or not there's a staff burden, we have stopped everything for several years. I think we have some responsibility to get back into this and serve the community, which would be do the lottery, establish the list, and subsequently, because you want to know where you're at on the list. You want to be able to, maybe you publish that on the website, and you don't have to take those phone calls anymore and say, this is where it is. We update it every month. That's where you check. And once people get into that mode, they will not call you anymore if that's the way we do it. So I would go with lottery, establish the list. For the future, it's first come, first serve. And then you go through that as time goes on. And it allows you to plan and to think, okay, I'm 86th on the list. Maybe 10 people will drop out. It just gives you some idea.
So if I'm understanding kind of that combining
Yeah,
option 2
yeah.
and option 3
Perfectly
that
articulated,
trustee Hazelton
yeah,
was
the
talking
two-
about.
yep,
Got
yep.
it.
So I
Thank
think
you.
lottery to establish, to
Got
take
it.
that, like camping out in a tent, although I think that would make the news, I don't think that's going to be effective for most people.
So, Jackie, I'm fairly I don't really care about option 2 or 3. It seems like either one could work and maybe we combine them. But I don't think option 1 makes sense because we would lose substantial lodging taxes and sales taxes off of that. And I don't see us, well, I personally do not want to do that at this point.
Thanks, Kirby. I was just going to respond to Trustee Lancaster's comment about 1 per unit if we did a lottery. I didn't bring this up earlier. The important thing just to recognize in advance about that is if someone owns a single large building with a number of units in them, in it, then they can apply 1 for each of those units, and odds are good that they'll get a number of winning entries relative to an individual. Even if that person only really wanted to turn, say, 4 or 5 into a short-term rental, they could apply for all 20 knowing that they'll get some of them. That's not necessarily, a fatal flaw, but just something to be aware of.
Yeah, if it could work logistically, I think I'm interested in the combo, because I think the idea of it, and maybe it is, hey, here's the window for when you can submit to be in the lottery. Part of it's the unknown. We don't know if we're going to get 24 people interested or if we're going to get 200, right? If we get 200, that's too long of a wait list. It's a problem. maybe. If we get 24, that's right where we want it, or somewhere around there. And then once that, okay, lottery window closes, we draw, those people are in the wait list, and then everybody after that is first come, first serve. That sounds appealing to me if we could pull it off in a way that makes sense logistically, but I think the big question is the board has to decide the wait list cap, and it's hard to make that decision when we don't know how many applications we might get. It got up to 60. Do we think that would have happened again with 100 additional commercial? It's hard to know. So I think that's just where I get stuck on the viability of that plan, but that's where I'm leaning right now.
I think just knowing that we've taken 20 to 30 phone calls just since the start of this year when
Yeah.
we started, we should start, Bunny actually, so we should start keeping track of all the phone calls. It just kind of gave us an idea, roughly. I would say just one additional drawback for you all to think about combining 2 and 3 is it does limit then, it's putting an artificial moratorium, I guess, or maybe it is an actual moratorium of anybody coming in for the next 2 to 3 years, right? They would not get an opportunity at all to get in the lottery or on that wait list. So they'd have to wait till we got through that process. So I just wanted to put that out there as well.
Yeah, which is fair, and also that's what we're currently faced with, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, thanks.
Exactly.
I just want everybody to remember that we are talking about residential.
Correct.
And residential for the people who live in Estes Park is residential. So when we start talking, and this is no offense to Bill, but it was about your comment, Bill, about, sales tax and housing tax and everything else. We're talking about residential zones for our citizens. Just want to make sure everybody reminds that. The other thing I just had a question of, and this is correct to Dan's comment about the 20 units. Do we have anything in town in residential that has 20 units in it? Or not, even 10. I'm not using that number. In a residential zone?
We might have some townhome developments or whatnot. I'm not thinking of anything right off the top of my head, but I know we have a planning director in town, or in the audience. I don't know if he nods his head that he thinks we have anything he can think of, but I don't know the answer for sure.
That's fine. I just,
But
it's
I
always
think
hard
of
to make a
Eagles.
decision.
I think of Eagles Landing. I think Eagles Landing might be RM, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, I just want to make sure we know all that before we make decisions based on unit per that kind of thing, because, if we're looking at things like, if they have 100 units, well, nobody has 100 units, so let's barrel it down. And I'm just using your number as example, so
Correct.
that's all.
While we're doing it, we should keep in mind, is your position in the waiting list transferable?
No,
So we'd have to make that clear that somebody couldn't.
not currently, not in the current list.
Because
It
it's
is,
not your permit, but you could say, it's a sales
It's-
advantage to say, hey, I'm third in the list.
correct. We've made
Buy
that.
my property instead of buying like Cindy's property that isn't on the list, I'd have to start at the beginning.
Correct.
So-
We've made that clear that that's not transferable currently, if it's something the board wants to discuss, but it doesn't add value to the property if you sell the property, that your position goes away on the board. And it's also not transferable to a different property that you buy. We get that question quite often in our office. I've sold that property, but I bought a different property. Can I transfer it to the new property? And the answer is no.
After that robust discussion, do you have sufficient information, town clerk or town administrator, to take it to the next step, or are we still a bit scattered?
I guess it seems like we have a couple people saying they like a combination of option 2 and 3. Is that, I don't know that we have a majority telling us that.
I'd be okay with that.
Okay, look at that.
Is that something you'd like us to work on and bring back forward for another discussion, or bring back forward as an ordinance?
I think we could go to the ordinance
Okay.
step, and, obviously we can send it back for changes at that point.
Okay.
I know this is an evergreen recommendation, but I would encourage folks to weigh in on their thoughts on this realtor and otherwise, because I think it would be helpful for us now that we're maybe narrowing or starting to consider. It'd be really helpful if the public has input to share that.
Bill nodded, but, which was more of a nod than Director Caressia, who should play poker, I think, but anyway.
Okay.
Please look down now.
All right. Any additional discussion you want to have on the cap at this point, or should we move into the hosted? Okay. Dinner is over there on the side. If you're interested in grabbing dinner, you can do that.
We do need to decide on the cap, but that's not going to be
Whether or not
tonight.
you guys want to make any changes to it. So we can go through the hosted next, and if you guys, because they are a little bit combined.
Yeah, a little bit.
And then if you guys want to have a conversation about the cap, we're still here talking about vacation homes, so you can give us some input on that as we move forward. I just need to change presentations here for you. Do you just want to take, do you want to take a 5-minute break just to get your food and get situated,
There's
or?
going to be a lot of brown paper noise here for a bit.
Sounds like
so,
it.
Yeah.
I'll give you a second, and I'll cue this up.
We, we're still online, I will remind everyone, but yeah, we'll get everything distributed. In the meantime, since I am online and I have a monopoly on the microphone, thank you, Officer Michala, for the safety and security. All right, the big brown paper motion noise has, we're past it. Now we only have to worry about microphones being on when the chips are being eaten. So we'll take care with that. Town Clerk, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mayor. So our next topic, as we've kind of stated, they're all integrated. The next topic is the hosted short-term rentals. So again, why are we here? It's just kind of reminding us all of the history of how we got to where we are today. Mainly what we're going to go over today is that second town board discussion that we had in November of last year. Really want to go over the outcome of that with the board. Really, we ended that conversation with you all kind of giving us some feedback, and then we ran off to the town board meeting. So really, I think the goal of today is to kind of wrap up that discussion with the board and come to some conclusions on next steps. So a review of those three options that we went over. Option one, we had 3 board members in favor, which is to have a separate hosted category. Option 2, we had 4 board members interested in simply removing that owner occupancy prohibition that we currently have in our code to allow both a hosted or unhosted option at a property at any given time. And then we also brought forward a no change option, which really we did not discuss at that last meeting. We really were focused on option 1 or 2. So again, really want to go over and review the board's discussion at that last meeting and then get some further direction from the board tonight.
As I recall, the option 1, we thought there was a lot more administrative work to having a separate category, a third category.
Yeah, we're going to go over that a little
Oh, you
bit to define that. That was,
Okay.
Mayor, thanks for saying that. That was one of the other main elements that came out at the very end of that conversation was the enforcement piece. So going to try to highlight that a little bit more tonight and see if I can help hone in on what staff believes are some of the administrative burdens and enforcement issues with that. So again, this is what currently is in the municipal code as it relates to the number of parties. This is the key definition that we're looking at making changes to with that option 2, the no more than 1 party. We would amend that, as well as owners of the vacation home shall not occupy the vacation home while a party is present. Looking at amending that piece to allow, again, both hosted and unhosted in that option 2. So to review the options again, option 1, separate hosted vacation home. Again, 3 of you were in favor of that. Some of the comments that staff heard from that last meeting were that you supported a separate category with a primary resident as the host, that there would be no cap, there would be no regulatory linkage fee, and that you would allow multiple parties to rent at that time. So those were kind of the high level comments that staff took away from the board. As a reminder of some of the issues, significant issues that we brought forward with that is by creating a separate category, staff identified that there could be we could be incentivizing some of our properties to become hosted versus unhosted if there's no cap and if there's no workforce regulatory linkage fee. Staff does, both town clerk staff and code enforcement staff, we just don't have the resources, and I know this is a key element, and we'll get into it more, key element of that we feel that it would be hard to regulate whether the primary resident is actually living on the premise and actually present during a short-term rental. I say that because we've had some experience. So we had a property last year in which we were trying to bring them into compliance. They did not have a license, so a little bit different scenario, but it'll give you a flavor. We tried to bring that property into compliance with either a vacation home license, which they weren't eligible for because of the residential wait list moratorium, and so they were looking at becoming a B&B. But of course, we also had a moratorium on that. But once you guys got through that, we were trying to get this property in compliance. They ended up having 3 different primary residents at that property in 1 year. And every time we went out, code enforcement, to address the illegal rentals, we didn't know who to contact because it was a different primary resident living on site throughout the year. So it became a real challenge, and we spent a lot of staff time in the clerk's office and code enforcement on one property. So that's what we mean about not having the resources to make sure that we're able to identify and ensure that somebody's living there. Again, that residency challenge. So we in staff don't feel like we can really recommend this option unless we have an enforcement mechanism in place. So those were some of the key elements that we brought up last time. Again, what we brought up, the pros, it does allow that primary resident to occupy a portion of the home while another portion of the home is being rented. This is a little bit of a carryover, and I should have changed it from your guys' comments, but we had recommended one, only one other party. You all suggested potentially multiple parties. Again, some of those cons are that enforcement to ensure the property is actually hosted when it's being rented. And again, the incentive piece of potentially having some of our unhosted properties identify as hosted to avoid that regulatory linkage fee. As well as properties who can't get one right now because of the cap on the unhosted might try to become hosted to not get around, but avoid having that cap be applied to them. It also could encourage development of non-permitted uses, and we'll look at a couple of those that we've seen throughout the years and some new ones that we have. Here's my attempt to try to highlight a little bit more of what we see as some of the administrative burden, as well as the code enforcement burden. Again, we're thinking that we might, with a hosted, we probably want to have something similar as we do with the current B&B regulations of having a map so we understand what portion of the home is being used by the host versus those renting the property. We would have to spend time reviewing advertisement to ensure that the property remains hosted throughout the year. Requiring updates of the permanent or the resident information throughout the year. Again, that example I gave you gets kind of hard, and sometimes we don't even find out, for example, when properties change hands, much less when the resident doesn't change. And I think it's important to remember we have a very seasonal and transient sometimes workforce where people come, they try to make it here. They can't make it here if they're listed as the primary, it shouldn't say permanent, it should say primary, that's a typo. Primary resident, but then they leave, that property now is left without a primary resident and nobody's hosting the property potentially. And again, I think it would be important for us to notify the neighbors of any change of that primary resident. Those are all administrative tasks that we would have to ensure are getting completed. And those are the ones that we could think of. I'm sure there's some others. Enforcement, again, one thing that we hear from our citizens, our residents, is they really get frustrated with complaint-based enforcement. This would be complaint-based enforcement. And so we would see that as being an issue of neighbors complaining that their hosted property is not actually being hosted, spending code enforcement time to go out and try to identify if that's actually what's happening. We just see that being a lot of extra time, and we actually have found that our code enforcement officer spends a pretty good amount of time with us right now with code enforcement annually on our vacation homes. And again, it's mostly complaint-based unless we find it through our third-party vendor, which we do find some of those. So I don't know if that helps you, if you have any questions related to any of that. Okay. So we're going to review option 2 next. Again, that was seen as kind of more of the easy fix that was favored by 4 of you. You stated that you liked it because of its simplicity. It created no new caps. It created no new categories. And there would be no change in the fees, meaning that you all stated, those of you that were in favor of this, stated that you would maintain that regulatory linkage fee. You also stated that rental to no more than one party, so it would be the primary resident living there, as well as the additional party that was renting whatever portion of that home that they were renting. It would reduce enforcement and allow flexibility so that the property could be hosted or unhosted throughout the year. There was some concern that there would be no protection of the residential neighborhood with option 1 and with no cap, that was mentioned. As well as those of you that were in favor of this option thought that we should go ahead and allow the B&Bs that we currently have licensed the ability to apply for a vacation home license over and above the current cap if we went with this option. One of the final things is it was mentioned is that it would provide additional housing. Again, how is that done? It would be a portion of the home maybe be rented to a primary resident that would be the host, while the other portion of the home, and that could be somebody who's a part of our workforce currently, and then the rest of the house could be rented out. So those were the comments that we heard from the board. Again, some of the pros and cons mentioned were the ability for it to be flexible. You'd have the ability to have it hosted or unhosted at any point during the year. There'd be no restriction on the resident occupying the home if we went with this option. The workforce housing regulatory linkage fee would apply regardless if the property was being hosted or unhosted for any portion of the year. And it would remove that incentive for a property to maybe change from an unhosted to a hosted property to avoid either the cap or that linkage fee. It could also be included in the current residential cap, so we wouldn't need to have or create a separate residential cap for these properties that wanted to be hosted. And we also just think that the enforcement issues would be less because there wouldn't be a need for us to ensure that somebody's there if it's hosted or unhosted, because they would have the flexibility to come and go. So it would have that continuous ability to rent the property regardless if it was hosted or unhosted at any point during the year. So it becomes, there wouldn't be a code enforcement issue with that. One of the cons, again, may be that it would encourage development of non-permitted uses in the single-family zoning districts.
Jackie,
Yes.
do you know how many bed and breakfasts are located in residential zones?
I believe all 11 of the ones that we have licensed. I'm looking at Bunny, she kind of nodded at me, phoning my friend.
Bunny's the source.
But I believe all 11 of them currently are.
Okay.
We were asked last time too how many we thought. It really would be up to the individuals, but I think when we looked at them last, we were able to identify at least 3 of the 11 that could easily function as a B&B. So we would imagine at least 8 of them would probably be interested in this hosted concept. There are some common elements between the two options that we thought we would identify for you all. Again, some of those common elements are that all the other regulatory elements that we have currently for our vacation homes would remain, with the exception of 2 that we've identified so far. That primary one that we've been talking about would be allowing multiple parties to occupy that home. It wouldn't just be one party, it would be potentially that host and at least one additional party. And also allowing home occupations. If somebody's going to live there and they have the ability to work from home, we want to make sure we're not taking that ability away from them. Currently, that's not allowed with a vacation home licensed property. So we want to make sure that we're addressing that. Occupancy limit would apply. So if it was a hosted property, the host and their family, let's say there's 4 of them, the property is allowed 8, they would have the ability to have 8 guests, or 4 more guests, I'm sorry, for a total of 8. See if I can do math. And it could also be limited by the number of guests, could also be limited by the number of bedrooms. So that could be also another limiting factor. We do suggest at a staff level that all the inspections would still apply to all these properties to ensure that there's compliance with our municipal development, our building codes. And also, again, that common element between 1 or 2, we would allow those B&B properties to convert if they wanted to and exceed potentially that residential cap if we are using that in either of those 2 options. Just wanted to bring up some examples. So some of you will remember this example. This is what started the whole B&B conversation to begin with. This property has a mother-in-law suite kind of in the middle of the property on the lower level. And as you see there, it states that it will be occupied when the property is being rented. So one of the things we would want to make sure if we had a hosted property, that we are ensuring that the primary resident has to actually live there as well as be present when the property is being rented. So this is one of those examples that we've seen where people just have somebody present when it's being rented. We would want to ensure that the property is actually, the primary resident's actually residing there. This is a new example. We've only had 2 B&B applications come in since the regulations were approved in July. Both have not completed the process for one reason or another. But I just thought this was an interesting example to share with you because I think it's a classic example of what could be considered a hosted, an option for the property owner to be a hosted property. The entire top level over there on the, I guess, on the left, is the upstairs of the property and is completely the property owner's living space. They intend for just that lower downstairs area that's outlined in yellow there to be the property, or to be the area that's rented to the guests. As you can see, it has an outdoor entry point, so they don't have to have any interaction with these guests at all. People could come and go freely. And so I could see this as a primary example of an option that could be hosted. And then this is kind of our final example, and I know it's a little confusing, but you'll see the garage kind of there in the middle, and then to the top of that garage, you see the new, I think it says new family room, new bar, and on the other part, I think it says new loft. This is the example that we also brought forward to you all, where a property owner has a house to the bottom half or bottom of the garage, is a full 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, a garage, and then they built on to this property, in essence, another unit. I would imagine in this example, this property owner would use that new addition for the primary resident, and then the entire rest of the house to the south of the garage there would be rented out as the vacation home. So these are just some different examples to show you how I think the hosted, how staff believes the hosted might be utilized by individuals wanting this type of license. With that, I kind of want to open it up to any comments or discussion with the board. What I do want to note, as we put in the memo, what staff is really looking at is, it was 4-3 last time, whether or not staff should move forward with developing an ordinance with option 2 at this point, or if there's additional comments on the options, and also whether or not we want to continue to move forward with the idea that the current B&B should be offered the opportunity to apply for a vacation home license above exceeding that residential cap. So kind of looking for some discussion and commentary on those items so that we can maybe move this forward.
I'm closing in on my 1-year anniversary as mayor, April 23rd. Some of these things seem to take a little while to keep the wheels going. I'm a yes and yes. Option 2, which originally I was not in favor of last time we spoke, so that might be an additive there, and certainly allowing the bed and breakfast to make the transition without impacting the whole cap structure. We can still set a cap as we see fit on the regular cap. That's my comment.
I have a question. On option 2, it does, I think, kind of lend itself to maybe having homes be turned into duplex type situations that I know we've had trouble with in the past. Do you see that being more of an issue if we allow this type of option 2?
Well, Trustee Youngland, that's definitely a possibility, and it's something that we've talked about. One option, if the board is concerned about that and wants to make sure that that doesn't happen, is to add that to an inspection for a vacation home when those inspections happen and new licenses are granted, to make sure that there's not an illegal duplex. Right now, there's also not an ability to have an ADU and a vacation home on the same property, so same thing there.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would be, I like option 2, but I think we need to really be careful on our inspections and make sure the zoning, obviously, and all that. Back to that cap thing now. I mean, I think they need to come over and have the opportunity, the B&Bs that can't fall under that correct, or our new term of B&B, option to have a license. However, I am not in favor of going over the cap. And so I don't know how, I mean, I guess we could go over the cap for a bit to get them in, but I would want to make sure, and that's why I was thinking of option 1 earlier, is to not open it up, because this would send it over the cap. And if we go with option 1 for the cap in the other discussion, then we can just revisit it when we get those numbers back down. And that way, we're playing fair, I think. So that was my rationale there. So I would be in favor, but I am not in favor of raising the cap over what we have to accommodate them to come in.
Sure, I will make a quick comment on that, just as a reminder to the board. The current properties have until January 1st, 2026 to come into compliance with the current B&B regulations. So a scenario that maybe we could think about is, having them come into compliance. I don't know if that would be an amendment. I'm looking at Attorney Kramer for some advice here, of some amendment that maybe we extend that to the end of February of next year, so that as we have attrition next year after our renewal process, that they could then come in. Instead of taking anybody off of a wait list or starting that lottery system, we could then have those properties convert over to vacation homes if they wish. Just a thought that I thought of, if that is a concern of the board as a whole. So I thought I'd throw that out there as an
Before I turn
option.
it to the town attorney, remember my math, 11 is actually the average on an annual basis. So if you brought 11 B&Bs over, it'd probably only be about a year.
Correct.
That they would come in. Still, unlike Trustee Youngland, I would favor that being a separate item and not impacting the cap.
Well, I certainly support this. I supported it before. It's the simple solution, and I still don't know why we had that limitation there before. As far as the cap goes, from a practical matter, we're talking about moving people who are already businesses, they're already operating, they're already impacting the community. It's not like we're adding to the list. So the number of real properties out there operating wouldn't change. So I'm fine with either bringing it down and then let the cap come down by attrition, or I'm fine with raising the cap to bring those under, which would match what we have on the ground right now. It's not an increase of the number of properties. It's the same number of properties that are operating as rentals now. We're only talking about probably 8. So go from the 322 to 330 and then lock it off there. And then, of course, some of them that are truly bed and breakfast, let them stay as bed and breakfast. We talked about that before. They don't have to move over, and we'll keep that differentiation. But I could go either way on the cap thing, but I think those businesses that are operating ought to be able to switch over and not have to go out of business and move over and do it simply. And so I support that direction.
I'm more or less with Frank on this. I actually voted for the first option initially, mainly because I oppose the linkage fee. And I think in light of 6E, we shouldn't have a penalty put on short-term rentals. And I'm a little concerned with option 2, if you're going to have the linkage fee if you convert, but you don't if you stay, that there'll be a lot of incentive to stay anyway to avoid the linkage fee, whether they're going to actually comply or not. And I can see people, you know, trying to get close to the line on that where there's still a bed and breakfast, but avoid the linkage fee. So, and I don't think there's probably a lot of appetite from the board to repeal the linkage fee, even though I would like to do that. If there is, I haven't heard it. And so that's just a concern I have about how do we assure that the ones that stay bed and breakfasts actually are bed and breakfasts? Because that'll be another.
Am I mishearing that? I thought option 2, that the linkage fee was the same in both,
It's,
whether hosted
but
or
they're
not.
not paying the linkage fee as bed and breakfasts, but they would if they became short-term rentals. So that's a disincentive. There's a disincentive to convert as well. And is that such that, you know, while we think 8 should convert, maybe 8 don't convert because they think, I don't want that linkage fee.
Yeah, I would speculate that the option to make earning off of that unit would more than compensate for the linkage fee. But that's just speculation.
I would agree with Frank, and I do have a question though about specifically the B&B and the cap. So if a B&B doesn't come into compliance and doesn't, with our updated definition, and doesn't move to what we're proposing here, if we do move forward with it, then they're out from this current conversation. They would have to get in the wait list
If
moving
they
forward if they
didn't,
wanted to return, right?
if they
Do you know what I
didn't
mean?
want to, so you're talking about like, let's say a year
So the
from now,
existing
2 years from
properties.
now,
Yeah.
they are operating as a B&B and then decide, let's say 2 years from now, that they want to be a vacation home. Yes, they would end up having to be on, I think we would give them the opportunity, a limited time to come into compliance with, or to apply. I could be wrong, the board can give direction on that. But generally, we give a period of time for people to make a decision to become a vacation home or stay at a B&B. And then after that, any further decisions down the road, they would end up being, I guess, the lottery / wait list
Right.
would come into
Exactly.
play.
Exactly, yeah. So okay, thanks. That answers my question.
Yeah, I think anyone that doesn't qualify as a B and B but doesn't want to switch over, basically, they're deciding to operate in violation,
Correct.
and then we would pursue that enforcement on them, that they're not in compliance. And with that lead time, you know, we could tell them, said, look, your other option is to shut down. So you can move into here, you can become a B and B and start serving meals, or you can stop operating. But to keep doing what they're doing as a hosted rental and calling themselves a B and B would be a violation of our code, and we could take enforcement action on them.
This question, I think, for Attorney Kramer, is there anything that would prevent us, should we decide to do so, to apply the linkage fee to bed and breakfasts to avoid the problem I was identifying?
Trustee Brown, I would have to think about that.
I didn't want to make this easy for you.
Thanks. I hadn't gone there. You know, I might want to check in with the consultants who put together our fee study, because that was all based on national data, and I don't know how bed and breakfasts would slot in. I don't know. Let me get back to you on that.
Okay.
I just wanted to explain my rationale as far as the cap. I believe, not all, but I truly believe that some of those people that went into the B&B end of it were doing so because of the cap. So I'm not saying all, but I do believe there were some, and I don't want to award somebody for going around the back way to get their business going when it was illegal. So that is my concern with the cap of going over, because I think that's just handing them exactly what they wanted in the first place. So anyway, just my food for thought.
So I don't disagree, Cindy, that that's what probably most of them did. But to me, it's kind of like, it was under our rules. And I kind of feel like, even though that's probably why they did it, there was nowhere to say they couldn't do it. So that's why I have no problem like allowing them in. I do agree that it probably was to circumvent the rules, but they followed the rules at the time. So, you know, that's why I think it's kind of fair. So about the linkage fee versus the B&B, there's a lot more to being a B&B, like we know, besides having a connection downstairs. We know it's harder. We talked about this. We had people come in, they didn't want to have breakfast. Totally get it. I think it's harder to be a B&B. And I think that majority of B&Bs aren't going to be used for workforce, because people aren't going to get up in the morning and make breakfast for their workforce people that are renting long term. So I don't think that actually fits with our linkage fee, because that was absolutely because it was taking away workforce housing, or the thought was that was what it was. So that's how I feel about B&Bs versus these hosted short-term rentals, is that you're not going to have a B&B person. Well, I mean, you could, that'd be great, right? But in general, B&Bs are not going to be serving breakfast to people working in town. So what I'd be in favor of, like I was before, is to basically just take the word hosted out and make it, you know, all short-term rentals, whether they're hosted or not hosted. You know, I actually like the ones that are hosted better. I think they do affect the community less. But I do think that just take that word out. I think that all the fees should be the same, whether you're hosted or not hosted, because that word's not in there anymore. And I think allowing the cap to allow the people in that had the B&Bs under our rules to jump ahead, basically, I think that is only fair, because under our rules they had the B&B. But that's it. There's no more, you know, now B&B or jumping in or that kind of stuff. But the people that already had B&B licenses when we stopped this, and we said, oh, we're going to look at hosted, I think it's fair to let them under the cap for the short-term rentals and just have that cap increase to that number. Now, whether or not we let it go back down with attrition, we can decide for sure. But I think for now, to let them in under that, I think is only fair.
So I think the same justification for B&Bs not having the linkage fee exists for these hosted short-term rentals, even if we don't call them that, because they are going to be occupied, well, not necessarily full-time, but they might be occupied full-time by a workforce member, and I think in most cases that'll probably be the case. So, and that's the whole problem with the whole linkage fee, is to apply it some places and not others. You know, the lodges don't have the linkage fee. And, you know, hotels don't have the linkage fee, but they have the 6E bed tax. And that's the commonality between all of them, which is why I believe we shouldn't have a linkage fee, that we've taken care of it in another way. Now, having said that, I'm not so naive to think that government ever gives up a revenue source that they have.
And that we've committed.
That's a tough thing to ask a government to do, but I still believe that invariably we're going to have situations that don't work with what we think it's going to work at, and that'll either be because they're trying to avoid the linkage fee or they're trying to avoid some other provision. It's endemic to the whole thing that those things will be present. So I've kind of changed my view insofar as I think option 2 is better. You've convinced me, largely because of enforcement issues. And I would personally agree with Marie, even though she left, that it's not fair to, you know, we let them in on that basis. So if they're willing to pay the linkage fee, I guess, then I don't think it's unfair to add to the cap for those that convert.
I think you've got a good preponderance of numbers. If I'm counting, we have not heard from Trustee Eigel. I do have one quick question for Deputy Town Administrator Dan Weber. The linkage fee, is that not part of one of the backstops on the Fall River Village deal?
That is correct.
Yeah. Hence, I think it needs to stay in the equation for whether it's hosted or unhosted.
Mayor, I don't have a dramatically different view than what our Mayor Pro Tem described. And I think that we should give the option to those bed and breakfasts if they want to come in to be in that cap. They did follow the rules. And I think that it's important for us to recognize that when people follow the rules, even if there's a little loophole, they follow the rules. So good for them. And let's bring everybody into compliance and move forward. And not discriminate based on hosted or unhosted for them.
Town Clerk, do you have what you need?
I believe we do. We've heard pretty much unanimously. We're going to move forward with drafting an ordinance related to option 2 and allow the current B&Bs that are licensed the opportunity to come in and be above that current cap for 2025. And then we'll address the cap issue next year.
And
That's-
as
is
long
what
as
we've
the
heard.
town attorney does not have a wrench that he's holding right now.
Yes,
It's a small wrench, small wrench.
I see him.
So, Mayor, it's easy enough for me to draft up option 2. We actually have the B&B topic on the study session agenda for the next meeting. It would be, I'm not sure I can draft up the ordinance on the B&B transition until I have an answer on whether we're raising the cap permanently or just letting people come over and then the cap will come down to the current level. That's something that we could pin down at the next meeting, or I could just take a crack at it and you guys can throw stones at it. We can do it however you all want.
I trust you to take a crack at it.
All right?
I think that we only heard one individual state they would be okay with it being over. I'm not sure where everyone else stands on that.
The latter suggestion that if we creep over for this adjustment period and then by attrition come back down is where I would land.
I think that's what I'm hearing more unanimously across the board. Yeah, I'm seeing head nods.
That help? Good.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We're getting close. I can smell it. No, wait, that's the chips. Sorry.
You're hearing that.
We can move on to trustee and administrator comments and questions and future study session agenda items. Future study session agenda items, town administrator.
Thanks, Mayor. 2, actually. One's a subtraction. We've had the Stanley Park Master Plan implementation on the approved unscheduled list for a long time. We had a conversation about that at the leadership team a couple of weeks ago and think that that conversation is probably best handled through our annual CIP process and not through a different prioritization process. That allows us to go through those projects in relative importance compared to the rest of those general fund investments. So I'm not sure, I think we're agreed that we can remove that from a study session unless the town board wants to talk about that specifically.
I'm okay. I think you're getting nods. Yep.
We will remove the B&B transition to hosted short-term rental study session for next time, which is fortuitous because we've been trying to find time to come talk to you about the electric rate study. So we would like to add that for April 22nd.
Okay.
And that's all I have.
All right, seeing no other future agenda topics for study session, this study session is adjourned. We will reconvene for the regular board meeting at 7 p.m.